v. Virginia decision, one of the most important constitutional law cases ever heard before the United States Supreme Court. It's really gratifying to have such a large turnout, to see so many familiar faces, so many elected officials, cabinet secretaries, and partner organizations represented. The stature and diversity of those in attendance speaks to the significance and relevancy of this marker that will shortly be unveiled. I would like to take just a moment to put today's marker dedication into context. As the oldest in the nation, Virginia's state highway marker system is the Virginia Department of Historic Resources' most publicly accessible and visible programs. Located along the roadside throughout the Commonwealth, these sound bites of history educate passersby, hopefully whetting their appetite to learn more about the thousands of threads that weave the rich tapestry of our collective history. For the past 2 decades, the Virginia Department of Historic Resources has prioritized the addition of markers that address underrepresented themes, especially those pertaining to diversity of our population. Thanks to special funding from our program partner, the Virginia Department of Transportation, we have been able to add markers that address topics pertaining to women, African Americans, Native Americans, and other underrepresented groups. We've also made a conscientious effort to fill gaps so that the marker program is more representative of Virginia's history. At times, this means addressing sensitive topics and results in marker dedications that are more commemorative than celebratory. Our motivation stems from the belief that in order to mature and evolve as a society, we must analyze and often re-examine the facts in order to accurately piece together the truth of our history. The Loving v. Virginia marker fills a glaring gap in Virginia's marker system. The topic we are commemorating is rich, multifaceted, and very deserving of recognition. With only 100 words, it is impossible for a single marker to do justice to such a complex and nationally significant topic. In addition to Commissioner Charlie Kilpatrick and the Virginia Department of Transportation, there are a number of others who have had a role in making today's dedication possible. Chief among them is Chris Beschler in the Department of General Services, as well as Bobby Vincent Jr., the Director of Public Works for the City of Richmond. I would also like to thank Justin Gunther with the Capitol Square Preservation Council and recognize the staff of the department who on a day-to-day basis manage this popular program, and those include Jennifer Lukes, Jim Hare, and Matt Gottlieb. It is now my privilege to introduce LeVar Stoney, who until January served as Governor McAuliffe's Secretary of the Commonwealth, and now holds the office of Richmond's 80th mayor. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable LeVar Stoney.
Julie, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you all for coming out on a very, very hot day in the city of Richmond. Doesn't summertime look good on Richmond? Yes, looks good on y'all as well. 1924, the Commonwealth of Virginia enacted the Act to Preserve Racial Integrity that banned interracial marriage here in Virginia, while defining a white person as someone who had a no discernible non-white ancestry. Then, 43 years later, the U.S. Supreme Court stuck up for all of Virginia, all Virginians, but also all of Americans. And it was the Lovings who put their life on the line, not only just for their family, but also for a number of Virginians who came after them. In 2014, Governor Terry McAuliffe began his time as governor of this great state, the 72nd governor. And at that time, he told a number of us that he wanted to build a new Virginia economy. But he also recognized that you cannot build a new Virginia economy without new Virginia values. He spoke from day one about being an inclusive, open, and welcoming place. In doing that, we worked on the restoration of one's civil and voting rights together. And I think you all may have read the Washington Post editorial this morning that talked about what the governor has done in creating a legacy for against discrimination on the books here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. But also, Governor, I want you to know I've taken your legacy of inclusiveness across the street to the city of Richmond. And day in and day out, I talk about how we build one Richmond. That no matter who you are, what color your skin may be, no matter who you love or who you pray to, that you can have a high quality life in the city of Richmond and you can live out your God-given talents right here. What we're working on is attracting talent. You cannot attract talent by putting walls up and ensuring that folks don't get an opportunity right here. And I gotta say, I learned that from one man. I learned that from the individual who sits right here behind me, the 72nd governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe.
Thank you, everybody. I want to thank the mayor for many great years of friendship. I also want to thank him. It was about 2 weeks ago on a Sunday that Molly Ward called me, my Secretary of Natural Resources, and said we're going to have a marker put up, but it's got to be done in the city. We've got 2 weeks to do it. So I called the mayor on the Sunday. I said, I need your team working. He said, Governor, we'll get it done. And we're about to unveil that beautiful marker over there. So I want to thank he and his team who helped make today possible. I never want to go far without introducing the First Lady of the Commonwealth of Virginia, my wife for 29 years, Dorothy McAuliffe, who's here with us today. But let me say this is another important day in Virginia history. You think about the history of this great Commonwealth, oldest democracy here in America. You look at those plaques inside our Capitol going back to 1617, the House of Burgesses. It's about individual freedoms, about giving people their right to live in a society where everybody's treated the same. And as you know, when this was all going on about 6 decades ago, that's not how people were treated. Unfortunately, here in our Commonwealth, we saw discrimination on schools, on accommodations, and how people were treated. It was a tough time. I was very proud 2 months ago to name our new building, the Attorney General's office, after Barbara Johns, a 16-year-old who in 1951 had the courage to say, separate is not equal, and we're not going back into school till we get treated the same way as white students. That was a tough thing for a 16-year-old woman to do. We're very proud of George Mason and our Bill of Rights and the individual freedoms. But sometimes that always hadn't traveled down to all of our citizens. And look what happened to Richard and Mildred Loving. Their crime, they were convicted of the high crime of loving each other. And it's an appropriate name, Richard and Mildred Loving, because they actually were convicted of loving one another. At the time, as you know, they were married in the District of Columbia and they came back to their home. They came back to Virginia. Unfortunately, they were arrested immediately. And their sentence was, believe it or not, they will suspend the jail term if they leave Virginia and never come back for 25 years. It's almost hard to believe, but that's actually what happened to Richard and Mildred Loving. All they wanted to do was get married. They loved each other. And all they wanted was their state to recognize them. And that didn't happen. So this case went up all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And 50 years ago today, that great landmark decision came down. It allowed people to marry one another who loved each other, regardless of their race. And that was a historic moment, not only for our Commonwealth of Virginia, but also for the United States of America. Today is a very special day, and it deserves a marker, and that's why we're here today, to bring that marker out. And the last thing, thank you. But the last thing I'll say is everything goes in a chain. Part of that long chain of liberties and freedom is marriage equality, which recently came down from the United States Supreme Court to allow individuals to marry one another, was based on that loving principle that came out from that Supreme Court. We would never have had marriage equality 2 years ago had it not been for Mildred and Richard Loving. So this chain continues as we go forward, and it's right that the Commonwealth of Virginia, the greatest state and the greatest nation on earth, recognize and understand our history, which we can never forget. But our history is what leads us to justice in the future. So I'm honored to be here. In a few minutes, we'll unveil the marker. I would now like to bring up to the podium Claire Guthrie Castagna and to do a reflection, who heads up the ACLU, providing and fighting to make sure everybody's voice is heard every single day.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you for the honor of the introduction by you. It's always a privilege to be in your presence and to commemorate important acts that you've been involved with. The Loving story is a powerful one of commitment and courage. It's about the ability of ordinary people to change history and change laws. Richard Loving and Mildred Jeter fell in love, as the governor said, and they just wanted to spend their lives together as a married couple. But due to Virginia's law against interracial marriage, which Mayor Stoney referred back to, the couple was prohibited from living together in Virginia and denied the freedom to marry. So they went to Washington, D.C., where they got a marriage license and got married, and came home to live their lives in what they thought was peace and love. But soon thereafter, in the dark of night, in the middle of the night, the police came to their home and dragged them out of their beds and took them to jail on the criminal charge of miscegenation and cohabiting as man and wife, quote, against the peace and dignity of the Commonwealth. The Lovings pled guilty to those charges and were given the suspended sentence the governor referred to, as long as they agreed to leave Virginia for 25 years. But once they got to Virginia, it just didn't feel like home. And like most of us wanting to be with the people that we love, they wanted to come home to Caroline County to live with their relatives and friends. So they called Robert Kennedy, and Robert Kennedy said, and we're proud of this, you need to call the American Civil Liberties Union, which they did. They wrote a letter to the National ACLU, and our national got together and said, let's get some lawyers, and they got two guys, young guys, named Phil Hirschkopf and Bernie Cohen. Bernie went on to become a delegate to the Virginia House of Delegates, and Phil Hirschkopf is now a nationally recognized civil rights lawyer, still out there practicing to this day. And those two young guys took the case pro bono without compensation and began the process of trying to vindicate what the Lovings believed was their right, which was to be in love and to live together. Now, I think it's important when we talk about historical context that this marker is right outside what at one time was the office of the Virginia Supreme Court. I mean, it's been the library, it's been lots of things, it's now the houses the governor's office, but there was a time when it was the Virginia Supreme Court. And it's important that the marker puts in context a part of our history which we need to learn from. Justice Carrico, who went on to a long and distinguished career and ultimately served as the Chief Justice of our court, wrote the opinion in Loving versus Virginia that upheld our miscegenation laws, our ban against interracial marriage, on the grounds that he had to follow precedent and that it wasn't inherently unconstitutional or denial of fundamental freedoms for you to be denied the right to marry the person that you love. Now, ultimately, the United States Supreme Court, in a unanimous opinion, overturned that Virginia Supreme Court decision, and it was touted, that decision was touted as, quote, rocking the foundations of Virginia's segregationist past. And that's why it is so historical about helping us understand and learn from our past and not repeat the problems of the past, but also set, as the governor said, the foundation for the future by making it clear that being able to marry the person you love is indeed a fundamental right and should be available equally to everyone. So today we honor civil rights pioneers, Richard and Mildred Jeter Loving. We honor their courage to stand up for the right to love unconditionally, their strength to endure the struggle against all odds, and their tenacity to prove that loving is really what it's all about. Now I have the honor of introducing to you the Honorable Floyd Thomas, who is a member of the Caroline County Board of Supervisors and who knew Mildred Loving personally.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and good afternoon. We're here, I guess the first thing, I want to thank all the folks from Caroline who made it down, the Caroline Historical Society, some folks from Bowling Green Town Council, some folks from the district that I represent, so give them a big hand. We are here really to celebrate the 50th anniversary of a decision. And I was talking to Julie when she first asked about this, and she kept saying 50, and I kept saying almost 60. And she went back and said 50, and I said no, almost 60. They actually got married in 58. The decision was 67, so there was a 9-year effort. A 9-year effort. And I always wondered about that effort, because it's easy to talk about when you finally win, but what you had to go through to get there. But to talk about Mrs. Loving, I actually attended the same church as Mrs. Loving. And in 2008, when she passed, I was the chairman of the Board of Supervisors, and I had the honor of speaking at her funeral. So I wanted to share that same short story that I shared with them then. One of the last times I saw Mrs. Loving was at church, and it was a special program, and like all good Baptists do, we had food. So I was actually in the buffet line, waiting, and there was commotion and people talking, and I heard this little quiet voice say, "Mr. Thomas." And I kind of looked around, and the little quiet voice again said, "Mr. Thomas." And I finally realized it was Mrs. Loving. So I I got out of line, walked over to her table and said, "Mrs. Loving, you can't call me Mr. Thomas. I call you Mrs. Loving, you call me Floyd, or whatever you want to call me. But you're the hero here. You're the icon. You're the national figure. You can't call me Mr. Thomas." And I realized at that moment I'd finally caught her alone, finally caught her with a chance, and I wanted to know about that 9-year struggle. And I leaned in and I said, "Mrs. Loving, how did you do that?" And she looked up at me, big face and all, and she said, "I just want to get married." That was her whole motivation. I just wanted to get married. And I thought about that, and I thought about that, and I said, she believed in some old Virginia words. Words like, when we say life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, if getting married to who you want to isn't the pursuit of happiness, I don't know what is. But that's really what pushed her in all those things. And now we celebrate it. So it's a great thing. I just want to say now that's the short story. At this point, I'm going to ask the governor, Madam First Lady, the governor, as he's called His Excellency, the mayor of the finest city of Richmond.
There you go.
He was a little too enthusiastic. Caroline is the heart of Virginia. Richmond's the capital. Julie, at this point, we should walk over and unveil the marker. So if you'll all follow us over there, we'll take your lead. Thank you.
Hi, how are you, buddy?
totally don't.
No, I did not.
Rip it off.
Look over. Definitely make sure you look over. There we go.
Ready, everybody? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Another great day for Virginia.
What a great day for Richmond.